and everything, the stronger the thought, the intention, the stronger you dig that into your mind, the stronger that becomes your habit.
Atkal uzstādām noteiktu mērķi vai nolūku savā prātā, atceramies, ka nolūks ir darbība ir karma, un jo spēcīgāks ir mūsu nolūks, jo spēcīgāks ir rezultāts.
So we first, those of us who think we are Buddhists already, we've, committed ourselves to the Buddhist path. We remind ourselves of our reliance upon the Buddha, his Dharma and the Sangha.
Un tie no mums, kas ir budisti vai uzskata sev par budistiem, atgādinām sev par paļaušanos uz Budu un Sangu.
Take refuge, as they call it.
Ja pieņemam patvērumu, kā to sauc.
And the second two lines are showing our, our commitment to the Mahayana approach.
Un pēdējās divas lūkšanas rindiņas attiecas uz Mahajānas pieeju.
The goal of which is our own Buddhahood.
Un Mahajānas mērķis ir mūsu pašu gaismība.
And the reason for which is our, compassion for others and our wish to benefit them.
Un tas iemesls tam ir mūsu vēlme palīdzēt visām jotošajām būtnēm.
So let's express these ideas. So we're thinking we're going to listen to these teachings to develop our qualities, lessen our own neuroses, develop our qualities, and then we're qualified to help others, all the way to leading them to Buddhahood ourselves.
Un tādēļ mēs klausīsimies šīs mācības, lai varētu mazināt savas neirozes, lai varētu attīstīt līdz pilnam maksimumam visas savas kvalitātes, lai mēs varētu palīdzēt visām.
This is the thinking we're practicing having.
Tas ir tas domāšanas veids, ko mēs tagad praktizējam.
And we can sing this little prayer that expresses it.
Except
I heard that Latvians are good at singing, but no, don't sing with me. What happened?
Es dzirdēju, ka latvieši labi dzirdās.
She told me, good I talk.
She sings very well.
Why does nobody join in with when I sing prayer? Am I singing a tune that you don't know?
Kāds neviens nepievienojas man, kad es dziedu, vai jūs nezināt šo melodiju? Oh, some of them are chanting it in Latvian.
Oh, are you Latvian? Okay, well, let's do it in Latvian. I mean, you do it in Latvian. Listen, come on then. We'll do one time in Tibetan, and then you people do it in Latvian.
Vienreiz timatiski.
We do Tibetan first, then we do that.
Vispirms timatiski.
Okay. Sangye charam, sokye chokram la, jancho barudak yap suchi, dagi chunyen gipa sonam ki, drola penchir sangye dropasho. Sangye charam, sokye chokram la, jancho barudak yap suchi, dagi chunyen gipa sonam ki, drola penchir sangye dropasho. So you know that third line, where normally you say jinsog, which means from the merit created by practicing generosity and the other perfections. Seems a lot for just two syllables, but that's the meaning. And then instead of this, when you say it in front of the teachings, you say churnyen instead, the merit from listening to the teachings.
Un trešajā rindiņā, ko parasti skan džinsong, kas nozīmē tie nopelni, ko esam radījuši praktiski devību pārējās pilnveidošanas, mācību laikā mēs aizstājam to ar čaņien, kas nozīmē tiem nopelniem, ko radām klausoties mācības.
So, now you can do Latvian.
Tā kā mēs varam darīt latvisku lūkšanu.
Pieņemsim patvērumu pie Tūras sēdes un sānas, līdz lūkšu sasniedz sagadresmī. Ar redzību pārējām pilnveidošanā krāju nopelnus, kļūšu par būtu par labu visam pārcenīšām būtu.
Okay. So, what have we been talking about so far?
Un par ko mēs esam līdz šim runājuši?
The topic is to be, is the transforming problems.
Tā galvenā tēma ir problēma pārveide.
Which is basically, the full phrase is transforming problems into happiness.
Pilnā nosaukumā tas skanētu problēma pārveide par laimi.
This attitude of welcoming problems.
Un tā ir attieksme, kurā mēs laipni sagaidām problēmas.
And in Buddhist view, a simple way of putting that is welcoming the things that attachment doesn't want, that upset attachment.
Un budistu terminos runājot, tas nozīmē sagaidīt laipni tās lietas, ko pieķeršanās parasti negrib.
So in order to understand that, which is and then second point, we've seen where that fits in the bigger picture of the entire path.
Un tad mēs esam arī ielūkojušies, kurā ceļa posmā tas viss iedarās.
And this fits in the Mahayana part.
Un tas iedarās Mahajānas ceļa.
If we look at that in the context of the big path, we look at the Tibetan packaging of it, as we know, they call it the Lamrim.
Un šis ceļa pārskats ir tibetiešu veids, kā viņi ir sapakojuši Budas mācības.
And this, is this kind of medieval phrase we would probably call a course.
Un faktiski, ja mēs izvēlētos to nesaukt kādā viduslaika frāzē, tad mēs to vienkārši sauktu kursu.
It means gradual path.
Bet oriģinālā tas nozīmē pakāpeniskais ceļš.
Well, that's what we mean when we say a course. It implies that, doesn't it?
Un, kad mēs sakām kurs, tas pats par sevi jau to ietver.
Everything we learn is packaged in a course.
Visu, ko mēs iemācāmies, parasti tas ir sapakots kaut kādā
And the experts have kindly arranged the information in a nice, orderly way.
Eksperti ir parasti sakārtojuši lietas noteiktā labā kārtībā.
We know this, how we learn everything.
Mēs to zinām, jo mēs tā esam.
It makes it manageable.
Tas padara to apgūstam.
But it surprises us to think you're learning a spiritual path in this way.
Bet mūs pārsteidz, ka ir iespējams arī garīgo ceļu apgūt tādā veidā.
But this is the point.
Bet tā ir tā jēga.
You know? So, this transforming problems is part of the Mahayana, which is, if you like, in this course, I like to call it university level. You know, in the language they call it the greatest, the highest, the great scope, great scope.
Un šī problēma pārveide pieder pie faktiski tāda universitātes līmeņa, jeb Mahayānas skatījumā to sauc par tādu visplašāko skatījumu.
So we know in our ordinary life, if you're at university, it means you graduated from high school.
Mēs zinām no savas parastās dzīves, ja mēs esam universitātē, tas nozīmē, ka mēs esam pabeiguši vidusskolu.
Which means you graduated from junior school.
Tas nozīmē savukārt, ka mēs esam pabeiguši arī
so
pamatskolu.
So we have to think, well, what's that as far as the Dharma is concerned?
Un tad, ko tas nozīmē attiecībā uz dharmas terminiem?
Well, junior school is Buddha's basic instruction to control your body and speech.
Pamatskola ir Buddhas instrukcijas par to, kā kontrolēt savu ķermeni un runu.
And why would you do that? What's that about? What's the context?
Un kāds vēl mēs to darīt, kāds ir konteksts?
Is that we're overrun by, this is where if we look into high school, we get to the real point where we really become a Buddhist.
Ja mēs ielūkojamies vidusskolas tematā, tas ir tā vieta, kur mēs īsti kļūstam par budistiem.
We understand the way the mind works.
Tad mēs saprotam, kā darbojas prāts.
Specifically the causes of suffering.
Un specifiski ciešanas cēloņus.
So the bigger picture of all of this
lielākā bilde tam visam
is Buddha's assertion that we can rid our minds of suffering. We can rid our lives of suffering.
Ir Buddhas apgalvojums, ka mēs
stop suffering.
Spējam izbeigt ciešanas.
In fact, flip that over and using the Mahayana approach to it, he says we all can become a Buddha.
Un, lai pagrieztu monētas otru pusi, to var pateikt arī, ka mēs varam visi kļūt par Buddhām.
This is the graduation point of this course, Buddhahood.
Tas ir šī kursa noslēgums, Buddhas stāvoklis.
Like we mentioned yesterday, you know, you all comfortable? Chair, yeah. That's his chair. We leave it for you, okay? It's your chair. What did I say? What did I say? I'm so sorry.
Graduation.
What?
Graduation.
Yeah, graduation. Okay. Buddhahood, as we discussed yesterday and the day before, the word Buddha in Tibetan, Sangye, implies this Buddhahood.
Un, kā mēs jau iepriekš runājām, šis tibetiešu vārds, kas apzīmē Buddha Sangye, apzīmē visu pilnīgu apgaistību.
Like we mentioned, the first syllable, sang, implies the ridding from the mind of all delusions, all neurosis.
Pirmā zilobe sang nozīmē, ka no prāta ir attīrīti visi piesārņojumi, visas neirozes un tā tālāk.
Which for the Buddha are the cause of suffering.
Kas Buddhas skatījumā ir visi ciešanas cēloņi.
And the second syllable, gye, implies the complete development of all the positive qualities.
Un otrs zilobe gye nozīmē visu labo īpašību pilnīgu attīstīšanu.
Which are the cause of happiness.
Un tas ir laimes cēlonis.
So Buddhahood is the goal.
Un tad mēs varam teikt, ka
the ridding of the mind of neuroses and the growing of all the goodness. This is what it is. This is what we're doing.
Ir mērķis un mūsu mērķis ir atbrīvot prātu no visiem.
So the entire course that leads us to this is all about this.
Un viss kurs, kas mūs līdz tam noved, ir par to.
So given that if we look into Buddha's view of the causes of suffering are the mind, the negative states.
Un zinot to, ka tas, kas izraisa mūsu ciešanas, ir noteikti prāta stāvokļi.
As laid out in the second noble truth.
Kā tas ir paskaidrots otrajā cēlajā patiesībā.
The main cause of suffering is the negative states of mind. Very simple for the Buddha, very simple.
Pavisam vienkārši galvenais ciešanas cēlonis ir negatīva prāta stāvokļi.
And as we've been talking in the last days,
kā mēs pēdējā dienās runājam,
effectively in day-to-day life, the main one is called attachment.
Galu beigās, ikdienas dzīvē galvenais ir pieķeršanās.
So given this, then the first thing, obviously, the very first level Buddha is saying is, given that we're completely controlled by attachment right now,
un to zinot, kad mūs šobrīd vaina mūsu pieķeršanās,
and in fact, we're desire and attachment, they're synonymous.
Vienkārši vēlmes pieķeršanās, tas ir viens.
And given that even more dramatically, the very life we live, Buddha calls it a desire realm.
Un faktiski Buda to veidu, kā mēs dzīvojam, sauc par vēlmes sfēru.
These bodies themselves are the product of desire.
Šie paši ķermeņi ir vēlmes rezultāts.
These 5 senses.
Šīs 5 smaņas.
So given all this, then obviously the very first level of practice, given that we're controlled by attachment.
Zinot to visu, to, ka mēs tiekam kontrolēti.
At the most basic level, Buddha gets us to control our body and speech.
Pats pamata līmenis ir Buda vēlas, lai mēs kontrolētu savu ķermeni un runu.
Which are basically the servants of our attachment.
Kas faktiski ir mūsu pieķeršanās kalpi.
It's through the medium of body and speech that we feed our attachment.
Un caur ķermeni un runu mēs barojam savu pieķeršanos.
We harm others
Mēs
to get what our attachment wants.
Kādējām citiem, lai dabūtu to, ko vēlas mūsu pieķeršanās.
So then the first level of practice is logical.
Un tādējādi pirmais prakses
Behave nicely.
Vienkārši uzvedieties
Don't harm others.
Nekādēji citiem.
And so you calm your mind down. You're controlling your body and speech.
Un kad jūs nomierināt savu prātu, jūs kontrolējat savu ķermeni un
So
runu.
naturally you're disciplining your mind by doing that.
Un dabiski jūs tādā veidā trenējat arī savu prātu.
You're not working on your mind, you're working on your body and speech.
Tad jūs vēl nestrādājat ar savu prātu, jūs strādājat ar savu
But it
ķermeni un
therefore
runu.
necessarily disciplines your mind.
Bet tas tieši arī ietekmē jūsu prātu.
And this is already profound, but underestimated.
Un tas jau ir visnotaļ svarīgi un nevajadzētu.
You know, we think, oh, being a Buddhist, you've got to be mindful, meditate.
Mēs domājam, lai būtu budistam, mums ir jābūt apzinātiem un jāmeditē.
All this is true.
Tas viss ir
That's
patiesi.
high school.
Tā ir
You
vidusskola.
can't do that until you control your body and speech.
Bet mēs to nevaram izdarīt, līdz mēs nespējam kontrolēt, kamēr mēs
Until you've
nespējam
disciplined your behavior.
kontrolēt savu ķermeni un runu un esam
That's junior
disciplinējuši
school.
uzvedību. Un
Then
tā
high
ir
school,
skola.
you really become a Buddhist.
Un tad vidusskolā mēs beidzot kļūstam
Become your own therapist.
kļūstam par saviem
Get in
terapeitiem.
touch with the neuroses, the delusions, according to the Buddhist view, understanding them so well.
Un nokļūstam tiešā kontaktā ar savām neirozēm un saprotam tās ļoti labi.
In order to see how they cause you suffering,
Lai mēs spētu ieraudzīt, kā tās rada mūsu
cause
ciešanas.
you suffering,
Rada mūsu ciešanas.
and cause you to harm others.
Un liek mums darīt par citiem.
Now we're qualified to get to the university,
Un tad mēs esam kvalificēti tikt arī līdz
where we continue working on our mind,
Kad mēs turpinam strādāt ar
continue
mums
ripping out the delusions.
turpinam izsaucīt maldus.
But now it's in the context of sentient beings.
Bet tagad tas ir jau citu jūtošu būtņu kontekstā.
And this is where transforming problems fits.
Un te ir tā vieta, kur parādās problēma pārveidi.
So even though it sounds sweet and simple,
Un kaut arī tas klausās jauku un
we're
vienkārši,
going to read the 8 verses
un mēs lasīsim 8 pāntus
from this genre of teachings.
no šī mācību žanra.
It's not complicated.
Tas nav sarežģīti.
You know, emptiness, like we talked 2 days ago, you've got to squeeze your brain to get your head around those concepts.
Lai mēs saprastu tukšumu, mums ir nedaudz jāpieklausās smadzenes.
But this is even more advanced, you could say,
Bet šis ir vēl advancētāks.
which is surprising that it's not evident.
Un tas ir pārsteidzoši, ka
This
tas
is
nav
why,
atklāts.
again and again, I'm saying we have to understand these teachings where they fit in the big picture.
Un tas ir tāds, ka es tik ļoti daudz atkārtoju, ka mums ir jāsaprot, kur šīs mācības iedarās lielajā bildē.
So that's what we've been discussing, isn't it, the last few days, all that, the bits and pieces.
Tas ir tas, ko mēs pēdējās dienas.
Well, the bits and pieces we've been looking at the mind.
Mēs esam aplūkojuši
How for
prātu.
Buddha the mind is the main thing.
Kā priekš Budas prāts ir galvenā lieta.
We've been specifically looking a bit at the delusions.
Un mēs esam ielūkojušies, kas ir
We haven't
maldi.
gone into much detail about them actually.
Un patiesībā neesam iegājuši detaļās par
So we have to rub our noses in that a bit today.
Un mums ir tāpēc nedaudz jāielūkojas arī tajā šodien vairāk.
Yeah. And then we talked about karma, which is fundamental to Buddha's view.
Un tad mēs esam runājuši arī par kritam, kas ir ārkārtīgi būtiski
You
mūsu
really can't understand Buddha until you understand karma.
Un mēs nespējam saprast Budu, līdz mēs esam netāsnāk.
Truly, you can't, you know.
Tiešām mēs nespējam.
You take a little piece of Buddhism, it's okay.
Ja mēs varam paņemt kaut kādu Budas gabaliņu, tas ir ok.
No one says you shouldn't do that.
Neviens nesaka, ka mums tā
But if you
nevajag darīt.
really want to understand Buddha's view of the world, you've got to understand karma.
Bet ja mēs patiešām vēlamies izprast Budas skatījumus pasauli, tad mums ir jāsaprot, kā.
It's not complicated.
Tas nav
The
sarežģīti.
principles are not complicated.
Principi nav grūti.
It's just that we don't like it.
Tikai vienkārši mums tas nepatīk.
So we don't want to think about it.
Mēs mums negribas par to
We'd
domāt.
rather buy into the materialist view,
Tā vietā mēs labāk izvēlamies materiālus.
which blames everybody else.
Un skaidrojam to.
We love to blame everybody else.
Un vēlamies vainot visus citus pārējos, tikai ne sevi.
Okay, 8 verses, where are they? You found them probably, Rita.
Yes, it's
In here
over
somewhere.
to
Prayers for them.
nectar.
What's with that? What training, maybe it's in here.
Yeah, what is it?
The ever-flowing nectar?
Yes.
What's it?
Because it's involved.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thank you. Okay, keeping away. All right. Okay, so let's read these boring title. It's called The 8 Verses. I mean, you couldn't get anything more boring than that, could you? That's the title.
Virsraksts ir ārkārtīgi garlaicīgs. Nevarētu izdomāt neko garlaicīgāk, kā nosaukt šo par 8 pantiem.
I was talking, what was the day before yesterday, we were chatting about different things at the centre with Agnes and Rita and my dearest friend. I'm so rude. I keep calling you Luna Rita. It's not your name, is it? Not yet. If you spell it for me, then I can see it more clearly. Spell it.
G-U-N-I-T-A.
Okay. You sound like Sanskrit, you people, don't you? And you know, Gunati, Agnes and Rita were chatting. And I was fixing this new age centre in Brisbane.
Vienu dienu runāju Ritu, Gunitu un Agnes, un tad es runāju par centru Austrālijā.
And they don't have a lineage. They don't have a lineage lamas and texts from the Middle Ages and things like we do.
Un viņiem tur nav lamas un
So what do they call their courses?
Un kā viņi saucās?
They're all about how to stop depression.
Viņi sauc
How to get self-confidence.
Kā izmērt depresiju.
Understanding, low self-esteem.
Kā saprast zemu pašvērtējumu.
So if you see a title like that, you go, oh yeah, I want that. That's exciting. You get it straight away.
Un ja mēs ieraudzām tādu nosaukumu, tad mēs to uzreiz saprotam.
But you see a course called The 8 Verses.
Bet mēs ieraudzām kādu kursu sauc 8
Who cares?
Kuru tas uztrauc?
So we've got to make our titles more tasty. The Tibetans make them tasty by you being poetic. Like the lamp on that guides you on the path to enlightenment.
Tieši savus tekstu nosaukums padara skaidrs, izvēlamies to ļoti poētisks.
You're not sure you want that either.
Un mēs droši vien nevēlamies arī kaut ko tādu.
Compassion, that's better. You like that.
Līdzjūtība ir kaut kas
So we've
labāks.
got to be more tasty.
Tā kā jāizvēlas labāk nosaukt.
Okay. The first verse says something like, have you got it?
Jā.
Okay, read it.
Tad pirmais pants skan. Nolūkās sniegt augstāko labumu visām malnākajām būtnēm, kuras ir vērtīgākas par vēlmes piepildošu dārgakmeni. Es nepārtraukti runēšos vērtēt tās kā dārgas.
That kind of sounds cute, doesn't it?
Tas skan visnotaļ jauki.
Most dear, most precious, wish-fulfilling jewel.
Visvērtīgākā kā vēlmes piepildošu.
So straight away we go, oh yeah, religion.
Un uzreiz
Up there somewhere.
Jā, reliģija.
Let's get it down to practical psychology, okay?
Tagad atkal atgriezīsimies pie praktiskās psiholoģijas.
And already it's intense. It's too intense. It's too much for the mind, really.
Un atkal tas jau ir tik intensīvi, ka, protams, ir kā daudz.
I mean, already stating the simple fact that you want to obtain the greatest possible benefit. Okay, this is an interesting point here. Does it say from or for all sentient beings? What does it say? What does it say?
For.
Determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings.
For.
This is very interesting because I think from is correct. But being put for. Let me explain.
Ir maz niansi, kā angļu valodā to var pateikt, restīvi ir iespējams pateikt, vai nolūkā sniegt augstāko labumu visām malnākajām būtnēm, vai nolūkā iegūt augstāko labumu no visām malnākajām būtnēm.
I mean, it initially sounds shocking to say that you want to get the greatest benefit from all sentient beings. It sounds terrible. It sounds evil, doesn't it?
Sākotnēji varētu izklausīties šokējoši un pat nedaudz ļauni, ka mēs vēlamies iegūt augstāko labumu no visām malnākajām.
But the meaning is very specific.
Bet tā konkrētā nozīme ir ļoti specifiska.
They talk about how, in order to, okay, what we're trying to do in the compassion wing is we, for us, cultivate compassion.
Tas, ko mēs cenšamies darīt šajā līdzjūtības spārnā, ir attīstīt līdzjūtības.
Okay, compassion action is trying to help others suffering. That's what the action is. But the first thing is you've got to cultivate compassion and the wish to help others in your own mind. You've got to, it's a practice we're talking about for yourself.
Un pirms mēs varam līdzjūtīgi palīdzēt citiem, vispirms mums šī līdzjūtība ir jāattīsta sevi. Tā ir praksa.
So if you want to cultivate compassion, what do you need and what do you need to have in front of you in daily life?
Ja jūs vēlaties attīstīt līdzjūtību, kas ir nepieciešams jūsu ikdienas?
What's the main thing you need in order to have compassion?
Kas ir galvenā lieta, lai būtu?
I'll give you a hint.
Es jums
I'll define compassion for you.
Pateiktu, kas ir līdzjūtība.
You see sentient beings suffering.
Kad jūs redzat, ka jūtošā būtnes
And the thought of compassion is, may you not suffer.
Līdzjūtības doma ir, lai kaut tu
Or
neciest.
it's empathy with the suffering of others.
Jeb tā ir empātija, iejušanās citu
So what
ciešanās.
do you need to have in front of you in order to cultivate that thought?
Tas nozīmē, lai šāda doma parādītos, kas ir nepieciešams.
And a suffering one. A suffering sentient being, right? You need suffering sentient beings, don't you?
Mums ir nepieciešama būtne, kas cieš.
So you need suffering sentient beings.
Tas nozīmē, ka mums ir nepieciešams būtnes,
It's
kas
not
cieš.
saying you want them to suffer.
Tas nenozīmē, ka mēs vēlamies, lai viņas
But if
ciestu.
you want to cultivate compassion,
Bet ja mēs vēlamies
you've got to have suffering sentient. You've got to see suffering sentient beings.
mums ir jāredz būtnes, kas cieš.
If you never met suffering sentient beings,
Ja mēs nekad nesatiktu būtnes,
how
kas
could
cieš,
you possibly have compassion?
kā mēs vispār varētu attīstīt?
It's really logical and simple, isn't it?
Faktiski tas ir ļoti
It's
loģiski.
so simple, isn't it?
Tas ir tik vienkārši.
So you don't want them to suffer,
Mēs nevēlamies, lai viņas
but
ciestu,
you've got to see suffering
bet mums ir jāredz ciešanas,
in order to cultivate compassion.
lai mēs varētu attīstīt līdzjūtību.
That's what it means.
Tas ir tas,
May I
kas
give the
nozīmē.
most benefit from all sin. In other words, they're grist for your mill.
Lai es gūtu augstāko labumu no visām notošām būtnēm. Tas ir tas, ko tas nozīmē.
Do you see the point? They talk about it, they use that concept a lot in Tibet, among the Tibetans.
Un tibetīšu vidē tas tiek daudz lietot šis koncepts.
You know, and then if you've really got big compassion,
Un jums ir
brave compassion,
milzīga līdzjūtība,
which we'll talk about,
par ko mēs runāsim,
as Geshe Sopa said,
kā Gaišs apteica,
bodhisattvas need their enemies.
bodhisattvām ir nepieciešami ienaidnieki,
Need their enemies.
ir nepieciešami
That's
savi
the
ienaidnieki.
meaning. And you do, so in other words, if to really get powerful compassion, which is compassion for people who harm you,
Un, lai attīstītu patiešām spēcīgu līdzjūtību, proti pret cilvēkiem, kas jums
then
dara
you've got to
pāri,
have people who harm you.
tad ir nepieciešama tā
You welcome that creepy husband.
Un tad jūs to laipni
You
sagaidāt.
love that mean boss.
Un jūs mīlat savu neģēlīgo
This is
bosu.
the attitude in the highest level of developing compassion.
Un tā ir tā attieksme, kas ir augstākajā līdzjūtības
Pretty
attīstīšanas posmā, un tas ir tā spēcīgi.
As Pamanga Rinpoche says, you've got to be a suitable vessel to even approach this properly.
Un kā Pamanga saka, mums ir jābūt pietiekoši piemērotam uztvērējumam, lai pareizi to pat sadzirdētu.
And what that means is you've got to have done some junior school and high school.
Tas nozīmē, ka mums ir bijis jāaiziet šis pamatskolas un vidusskolas posms.
So I think from is actually correct.
Un tad es domāju, ka
If you don't understand it, it sounds peculiar.
pareizākais veids, kā to formulēt, ir būt augstākā labumu.
So you see different translations in English as well, sometimes for, sometimes from. So unless you've really got to know the Tibetan exactly, we've got to really, that's, I think if it is from, that's the meaning, exactly.
Un te, ja mēs nezinām īsti tieši valodu, tad ir vienmēr šie divi varianti priekš.
So you are more precious than a bushel filling jewel.
Un tad tās ir vēl vērtīgākas par vēlmu piepilvošu darbu.
Excuse me.
Atvainojiet mani.
What does that mean, you
Ko
know?
tas vispār nozīmē?
So already, like I keep saying, these simple words imply so much previous inner work and understanding of the path.
Šie vienkāršie vārdi ietver sevī jau milzīgu darbu, kas ir paveikts iepriekš.
I'll hold them most dear.
Un es turēšu viņus kā...
At all times.
Vienmēr.
I mean, think of each of those words and it's an outrageous statement.
Ja mēs padomājam par šiem vārdiem, tas ir ļoti nopietns
I
apgalvojums.
mean, just that verse, you know, you could have, if Lama Zopa were giving a commentary, he'd probably talk for, you know, he could talk for a month on just that verse, giving the background to it, understanding it, and that's the way we have to approach this stuff, you know. It's part of a bigger picture.
Ja Lama Zopa sniegtu komentāru par šo pantu, tad viņi droši vien varētu par to runāt veselu mēnesi, sniedzot tam pamatojumu un fonu, kā līdz tam var nonākt. Tas arī kā
Okay, so before we get any further here, let's look into, again, a bit more deeply, the meaning of compassion, and at what point, what do you need to have accomplished already to really have it validly.
Tad pirms mēs virzamies tālāk, vispirms aplūkosim, ko ietver sevī šī līdzjūtība.
Well, again, remember, if compassion is in the you know, the university, it implies you had to have accomplished something in junior school and high school. So what is it you need to have accomplished to prepare you to have valid compassion in university?
Ja līdzjūtība ir tas, kas parādās universitātes līmenī, tad kas ir tas, kas mums ir bijis jāmūst šajā pamatskolas un vidusskolas līmenī?
Well, as His Holiness says, compassion is not enough. You need wisdom.
Kā viņa svētība dalībām saka, tad līdzjūtība ir nepietiek, mums ir jābūt arī gudrībai.
As Rinpoche says, meaning well is not enough. You need wisdom.
Un arī Rinpoche saka, tas, ka jūs vēlat labu, ar to vien nepietiek, jums ir jābūt arī gudrībai.
So even more clear, not more clear, but even more another point, another way of saying it.
Un vēl cits veids, kā to var pateikt.
is you can't have compassion until you've got renunciation.
Mēs nevaram attīstīt līdzjūtību, kamēr mēs neesam attīstījuši atteikšanos.
And renunciation is what you get from the compassion, from the wisdom wing.
Un atteikšanās ir tā, ko mēs iegūstam no
So what does that mean?
gudrības spēka, ko tas nozīmē.
Yeah. Well, it's got two parts, renunciation.
Atteikšanās sastāv no divām
The first point is you recognize your suffering and you are sick of it.
Atteikšanās nozīmē, ka mēs atpazīstam savas ciešanas un mums tās ir apriekušās.
In order to understand that, you've got to understand the meaning of suffering.
Un, lai saprastu to, mums ir jāsaprot, kas ir ciešanas.
And to understand that, we have to look at the first noble truth.
Un, lai saprastu to, mums ir jālūkojas pirmajā cēlējā.
Buddha outlines suffering in various ways.
Buddha paskaidro ciešanas dažādos veidos.
And one simple way is the 3 levels of suffering.
Un viens no vienkāršākajiem veidiem ir 3 ciešanu veidi.
And this already completely expands our view.
Un tas jau ārkārtīgi paplašina mūsu skatījumu.
Completely gets us to understand what Buddha is talking about. He uses, we know suffering is a big deal word for the Buddha.
Un tas liek mums saprast, ko Buddha domā, jo priekš Buddhas ciešanas ir ārkārtīgi.
So if compassion is may you not suffer.
Un ja līdzjūtība nozīmē, ka to neciestu.
And it comes from me understanding my suffering first.
Un tas rodas no tā, ka es vispirms saprotu savas ciešanas.
First I have to know what suffering is.
Mums vispirms jāzina, kas ir
So
ciešanas.
let's look.
Tad paskatīsimies.
3 levels.
3 līmeņi.
First one is what he calls it the suffering of suffering.
Pirmais līmenis tiek saukt par ciešanām.
We all understand this one.
Mēs visi to saprotam.
In your face suffering.
Tās ir ciešanas, kas ir acīm
The mean
redzams.
husband,
Jaunais
the
vīrs,
lousy boss,
nelabais boss,
the red light,
sarkanā
the
gaisa,
horrible food,
nelabais
the cancer,
vēzis
not to mention all the worst things.
un vēl vispārējās sliktākās lietas.
We understand this one.
Mēs tās ļoti
This is the
saprotam.
world's view of suffering.
Tas ir tas arī, kā pasaules var
And if you think about it, every sentient being spends every moment avoiding this.
Un, ja mēs par to padomājam, katra būtne pavadā visu savu laiku, katru brīdi izvairoties no šīm ciešanām.
So that one we get.
Un to mēs saprotam.
Then there's a second kind.
Tad ir arī otrs ciešanu veids.
This is sneaky, very scary level. It gets scary. It's a sneakier, subtler level of suffering.
Un tas ir smalkāks, viltīgāks
And the
ciešanu līmenis.
scary part is, it's what we call happiness.
Tā biedējošā daļa ir tas, ka mēs to parasti saucam par laimi.
This is shocking to us.
Un tas ir šokējoši priekš mums.
And Buddha calls it simply, it's such a boring title. Buddha calls this kind of suffering the suffering of change.
Un Buddha šo līmeni sauc par pārmaiņu ciešu.
And what that refers to, using Buddha's terms,
Un tas, uz ko tas attiecas,
is when, okay, the first one, if you like, a way of saying it, is when attachment doesn't get what it wants.
tad atgriežoties pie pirmā, tas ir tas, kas parādās, kad pieķeršanās nebūtu,
When the bad things happen,
kad notiek sliktās lietas,
which causes aversion and anger to arise.
kas rada nepatiku un dusmas.
We understand this one.
To mēs saprotam.
So the second kind of suffering,
Otrās ciešanas,
which we call happiness,
kuras mēs parasti saucam par laimi,
is when attachment gets what it wants.
ir tad, kad pieķeršanās dabū to, ko tās grib.
The green lights,
Zaļās
the
gaismas,
lovely husband,
jaukais
the
vīrs,
good, healthy body,
veselīgais
the nice
ķermenis,
weather,
jaukais laiks,
the good things happening.
labās lietas, kas
And
notiek.
Buddha's telling us it's suffering.
Un Buddha saka, ka tās ir
So, of
ciešanas.
course we're going to get upset and confused.
Protams, mēs kļūsim
So if
apmulsuši.
we want to understand Buddha,
Ja mēs vēlamies saprast
we
Buddhu,
absolutely have to understand this.
mums ir absolūti jāsaprot
If
tas.
we don't understand this, we really don't understand Buddha at all.
Un ja mēs šo nesaprotam, tad mēs nesapratīsim Buddhu
This is
nepavisam.
absolutely crucial.
Un tas ir ārkārtīgi būtiski.
And we've talked about this the last 2 days.
Un mēs par to esam runājuši pēdējās 2
So
dienas.
what the suffering of change means,
Ko nozīmē pārmaiņu ciešanas?
with the absolute belief which attachment has, that chocolate cake will make me happy.
Tas ir pārliecība, kad šokolādes kūka padarīs mūs laimīgi.
That handsome yarnie will make me happy.
Kad izskatīsies jārns padarīs mūs laimīgi.
Attachment believes it utterly.
Pieķeršanās tam pilnīgi tic.
Totally convinced about this.
Ir pilnīgi pārliecināti par to.
And every minute of our day when we're not trying to avoid suffering, we're trying to get this kind of happiness.
Un katru brīdi, kad mēs neizvairāmies no ciešanām, mēs cenšamies dabūt
In other words, attachment runs the show.
Citiem vārdiem sakot, pieķeršanās ir tā.
So how is when I get the chocolate cake or handsome husbands, how is it suffering?
Un kā, tad, kad es dabūju šokolādes kūku vai jauko
We
vīru,
can't just be vague about it.
kā tas rada
We've got to be
ciešanas?
specific.
Mums ir jāsaprot ļoti
This
specifiski.
gets us to